Quem vai decidir isso é quem entende de uma forma pragmática.
Hello, in this edition of I See Brazil, I talk today with Roberto Dumas Damas, Brazilian economist, master in economics, and professor of three of the most important Brazilian business schools, INSPER, IBMEC, and FIA. Dumas has a large experience at the financial sector, and he spent 3 years at the Chinese market. Our conversation included different topics on the Brazilian economy. My first question to him was, is it good enough, the pension reform bill, to be voted in Congress?
It's quite difficult to say this is good enough or not, because it will not end already. But let's put it this way, for example, we know that if our social pension reform does not trigger what we could say a saving around 700 billion reais for the next 10 years, it's going to be absolutely a mistake. Why it's going to be a mistake? Because that's not going to be enough to address what we call public debt, dynamic of our public debt. Because we have a dynamic of our public debt is increasing. Why? Because our primary deficit continues to deteriorate. Given the fact that our primary deficit continues to deteriorate, if we do not do something to save more money, public money, obviously, myself, you, everybody that's listening at us, that finance the government will require higher return, high yield. Once you require higher return, high yield, investment, the cost of opportunity will be higher. The cost of opportunity will be higher, investment, gross capital formation will be lower, consumption will be lower, GDP will be lower, and unemployment will be higher. So that's what we say. It's absolutely crucial that we have a pension system reform, just in the short term. And then you might ask, is this enough for us to have an economic growth sustainably? No, that's not enough. That's just necessary, but not sufficient. Because in order to have an economic growth sustainably, we need to have much more education and investment in infrastructure.
It seems that the reform will be approved. The main question is, what kind of reform will be approved?
It could be likely. For example, there are lots of people saying that, do you really think that we need a pension reform or a pension system reform? Yes, because based on our Constitution of 1988, Article 5, they say all people are the same, no matter what. But we have some numbers for us. For example, public servant. One public servant, usually they get retired. In average, they get 75,000 reais per year, per capita, public servant. Private servant, when we get retired, like myself or eventually you, we're gonna get just 14,000 reais per year. Military, when they get to retire, they will get, in average, 121,000 reais. Where is the social justice here?
So, considering the big picture, are you pessimistic?
A little bit in terms of pension reform, not just because of the pension reform, but also because of we might have some global headwinds that might affect the Brazilian economy. For example, take for instance what's happened in Argentina. 7% of everything that we export for the auto cars and auto parts goes to Argentina, and Argentina is in recession. So my exports, one of the drivers of my economic growth, is going down. And I think about investment. Investment, for example, we have Brumadinho accident. So Brumadinho accident led investment to go down by 6.3% and civil construction to go down by 2%. Consumption is still increasing for the first quarter, but the growth is much lower. Government has no money. So which engine do we have to end up 2019, 2020, assuming that we're expecting to grow by 3 or 2.5%? Not in a million years that's going to happen.
By the way, what are your expectations on the Brazilian GDP, unemployment rate, and private investments during 2019 and to 2020.
2020. As an economist, we cannot say, for example, that's 100% sure because we do not have a crystal ball. We cannot say. But it's very likely that our GDP for this year is going to end up by 0.8%. It's much less than 1.1. I mean, not much less. I mean, there's not much difference. Because in 2015, I like to remember that, I know, it's very bad news. 2015, our GDP went down by 3.5%. 2016, our GDP went down by 3.6%. 2017, our GDP went up by 1.1%. 2018, our GDP went up by 1%. This year, at the beginning of the year, we expected our GDP should go up by 2.5%. But after everything that happened, what? Trade tension between America and China, Argentina, Brumadinho accident, we renew or we reformulate our expectation in terms of GDP from 2.5% to 0.8%. Unemployment, that's not gonna get better this year. Why? Because investment, think as an investor, not as an investor in the stock market, but think as an investor in gross capital formation. Why on earth should I invest if I do not know whether or not the pension reform will be approved? If the pension reform is not approved, I may run the risk to get in an investment that could get a return lower than I could get investing in a government bond. So investment is going to be postponed.
Would you suggest for Brazilian companies to postpone new investments? What is the best option?
I would say my advice would be corporates should invest just to recover their accumulated depreciation, but not to increase productive capacity. Because eventually, if our GDP goes up 0.8% this year, and something happened regarding our pension reform, and I'm absolutely sure that our pension reform is not going to be approved with a saving like a 1 trillion reais. So next year, we might not have economic growth beyond 2%. So it's likely that your productive capacity is enough to attend, the consumption. So you do not need to invest now. Eventually, next year, but not now, to increase your productive capacity, but just to kneel or to replace your accumulated depreciation.
And regarding international investors, should they keep Brazilian market on their radar screen or look to other emerging markets or other mature markets at this point of time?
There are different international investors. For example, if you are thinking about investors that are willing to buy assets or willing to buy the flow of investment that could occur regarding the privatization and sale of assets that belongs to the companies that have been caught in a car wash corruption scandal, yes, they should check, because that's a bargain now. That's a bargain. But check about investors that eventually they be willing to invest in the stock market. Today, no.
My question is, what is more likely to happen? That Brazil, which is now number 9 in the ranking of the biggest economies all over the world.
GDP,
yeah, in terms of GDP. What is more likely to happen? That Brazil goes up in this ranking, or is more likely that other mature and developing economies overtake Brazil in that list?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say that my call is that other nations will overtake Brazil.
For example?
For example, I would say Indonesia and other countries like Malaysia is going to be much better. And again, I don't care much about GDP, because GDP is quite misleading. I care much more about GDP per capita. Because, for example, well, China is the second largest economy. Yes, we have 1.3 billion guys working on that. So that does not mean China is a very rich country.
In average.
In average. So we have to check in our GDP per capita. Once you do your GDP per capita, Brazil is downward hill.
Long story short, it's a long and winding road.
Yes. I'm not very happy with Brazil. I'm not very happy. For example, it's going to be like 4.5%, 3%. I don't think it's going to be. This year, 0.8. Next year, now, today, 2%. And 2021, if everything goes right, if you do not approve our pension system, downward trend. Next year is going to be 0.5%. This year is going to be 0.8, and next year is going to be a recession, and this is it.
Okay, Dumas.
Thank you very much.